Hey everybody, movie reviewer next door here, and I'm back with another review. This time I saw Colossal. This is a 2016 sci-fi comedy film directed by Nacho Vigalondo, and it stars Anne Hathaway, Jason Sudeikis, Austin Stowell, Tim Blake Nelson, and Dan Stevens. In this film, a woman discovers that severe catastrophic events are somehow connected to the mental breakdown from which she's suffering. So, what did I think of Colossal? Well, this is one of those films that I've heard about where I was like, wow, that premise sounds actually very original. And it is. That's one of the best parts of this film. Um, I do like the film and I did find it entertaining, but there were some things in this film that have been issues in a lot of other films. It's not like this is the first time I've seen these issues, but there are a lot of writing flaws that really stuck out like a sore thumb for me, and just character motivations that don't make a lot of sense, like specific things with how characters act from scene to scene that just came off weird, and there were some weird like technical goofs. But before I get to that, I'll get to the cast. Anne Hathaway plays Gloria, a woman who's kicked out of her boyfriend's apartment. She ends up working on her parents' old house, and she's mysteriously connected to this giant monster. Now, I'm gonna have to make this a spoiler review, so um, I'm not gonna spoil anything in the cast list, but I do want to talk about certain character motivations that don't really make a lot of sense. But spoilers, spoilers, spoilers. But yeah, she's connected to this giant monster and that's terrorizing Seoul in South Korea. Um, Anne Hathaway, I like her as an actress. I think she was one of the best parts of the Les Miserables movie. Princess Diaries, I like. Um, Devil Wears Prada, I don't mind as a film, from what I remember. I do think she's a good actress, and I think she's good here. Um, she is actually quite funny in a few scenes. Jason Sudeikis plays Oscar. He's the owner of a bar, an old friend of hers that they kind of rekindle a friendship. Um, he's also connected to a monster. Um, I like him here for the most part. I will get to that. I think overall his performance is fine. But again, I'll get to that. Austin Stowell plays Joel. He's a friend. He's in their little like friend group that like drink after work after he and Anne Hathaway are done working at the bar. He's kind of there to be the cute guy that she sleeps with once and basically pays no fucking attention to. I have issues with his character too and how he's written. Sorry about that. Realized my computer wasn't charging and it was about to run out of battery. Don't know why it got unplugged. But yeah, he's kind of just a doormat for a lot of the film and big part of my issues. Tim Blake Nelson plays Garth. He's again kind of just there to be another name in the cast. I like Tim Blake Nelson for the most part. And Dan Stevens plays Tim, another character that I have issues with. One thing I will start off with right now. I don't like how the male characters are written in this. Not because it paints them, for the most part, in a bad light, but because what this film is okay with and not okay with is very weird, writing-wise. Now, let me see. I think it was written by Nacho Vigalondo, but yeah, written by Nacho Vigalondo. So you have Jason Sudeikis' character, who for the first half of the film is a pretty nice guy, pretty decent, and then he's like doing this whole thing with the like he gets involved in this whole like being a kaiju thing, that whole rigmarole. And the way his character progresses, I did have a big issue with. because I get the feeling this film is supposed to be like an allegory in many ways about toxic masculinity. That's what I got from this, because pretty much every male character in this film is either a piece of shit or a doormat, like or a drug addict. Like Tim Blake Nelson's character, there's barely anything to him. The most you learn is that he's a drug addict when Jason Sudeikis has one of his fucking outbursts. Austin Stowell's character, there's a scene where Jason Sudeikis is beating the shit out of Anne Hathaway in the middle of the um, playground where they can interact with it and be the kaijus and whatever. And he just sits there and it's never addressed. Doesn't even try to help her, doesn't really try to stop anything. Dan Stevens' character, like, for a good portion of the film, up until like the last scene where she confronts him as the kaiju, Dan Stevens' character is kind of just. At first, you think, oh, he's legitimately worried about her, and then he turns into a dick. And that's where I think this film really suffered. I do still enjoy it, but I think a lot of that has to do with the premise, because the premise is really neat. Whenever she's in this specific playground from her childhood, she basically can move around in it and be somewhere in Seoul, South Korea, as this monster. And you have that premise. And then you tie it to like toxic masculinity. Like, that's a big issue I have with this film, is that I wish I could enjoy this more. And again, I know I keep saying it like I didn't like the movie, which isn't true, but it's a big issue. This film might think it's clever in doing that, and it really isn't. And the way that Jason Sudeikis' character goes from 0 to 100 in one specific scene really didn't work in trying to make him a villain. Because there are times where they tried to give him a bit of humanity after his outbursts, but it really just feels kind of hollow. I think one of the issues is Nacho Vigalondo doesn't know how to write that type of villain. And he's never played that type of villain. Because I've seen 2 other films of his that are, that he's either in or directed. Open Windows, the villain of Open Windows was not subtle in the slightest. You knew he was a scumbag up front. And he never really showed any humanity. Then there's this villain in Camino, with the Zoe Bell film, who is also just an insane piece of shit. I don't think I think he should have let someone else write this. And drop the whole toxic masculinity thing, because this film, up until like the midway point where Jason Sudeikis just randomly loses it at the playground and is like, yeah, you let all those people die. Ooh. Like, it feels so unrealistic, and it drew me out of the movie for that moment. And then you get to the scenes where they're talking like normal humans, and I'm like, okay, you've got me again. This is interesting. And I understand that you have to make us hate this character so that his death at the end really hits, and you're like, fuck yeah, you killed him. But the thing is, he doesn't feel like a human being. That's my main issue. If he was a better written character, I would care more. I would probably love this movie if it just didn't do the toxic masculinity thing, because it really comes off as a cheap gimmick, or it feels like a cheap grab to, oh, you've got all these people talking about how it's socially aware or whatever. You didn't need that. Nacho Vigalondo, you did not need that for Open Windows to be effective. You didn't need to latch on to a social issue. You talked about internet safety, yes, but at no point did you shove in some social message about like, oh, the main actress is over sexualized. It actually felt natural. It wasn't shoved in. Like, you somehow got a good performance out of a porn star, a former porn star. But anyways, Dan Stevens' character as well is very over the top in how he talks, and you're for some reason supposed to like him up until like the last scene again where Anne Hathaway's like basically fuck you bye. And I'm like, I didn't care about him from the very beginning because I felt like it was very obvious that they were trying to set him up as the bad guy. That's the thing. This film does that thing that I fucking hate that movies do nowadays when they want to be feminist and everything. They make the villain, they make all of the male characters horrible people, or they make them either doormats or horrible people, assholes, and they make the female characters perfect, which at least they don't make her perfect in this, but it really did stand out that that's what happened here. You could have had her fall in love with one of the guys. You could have had Austin Stoll's character be, I don't know, not a doormat. He could have been a pretty boy that actually, I don't know, cared about her. But no, you had to have their first scene together be him almost kissing her out of nowhere so that you could show that he's a scumbag, right? Like, I get the feeling this was rewritten for that because it just doesn't feel right. It doesn't work. And the dialogue that Jason Sudeikis has during the scene where he's ranting to her about everything feels really out of place. And it feels like just a villain coming out of nowhere. Another issue, during the hotel scene, Dan Stevens' dialogue throughout this entire film feels like it was dubbed or just recorded with a really fucking bad mic, because everybody else's sound was really clear. But whenever I heard Dan Stevens speak, it felt really, I don't know, it just didn't sound right. There's a bit where he says, hey, to her as he opens the hotel room door, and it goes, hey. Like, you don't get the rest of the word. So really terrible sound editing there. That's a big fucking issue. You usually look through your film before you release it. But what can I praise here? The creature, the monster effects. This film was made for $15 million. Not a huge budget there to spend on CGI. The CGI looks really good. And I think the fact that even though it's not motion captured, I thought it was in a good way, where there's a bit where you can see what the creature is doing at the same time Anne Hathaway's doing it. It's very well animated, and apparently they just animated it using her as a reference, which is fucking sick. It looks good for the most part. At no point do the effects really stand out as really badly done. The score by Bear McCreary was pretty decent. I think there's some decent cinematography. The film looks good. Doesn't look cheap. Again, for the most part, Anne Hathaway and Jason Sudeikis do good jobs. It's just I have some really big issues with how the characters are written, how pretty much every male character is an asshole or a doormat. But overall, I guess I recommend it. It's a very low 8. Very low 8. A lot of that has to do with the premise. If I didn't have the premise and it didn't have quite a few really cool moments, it would probably be lower. Because a premise like this deserves a really good, just a much better script and much more interesting villain. Because the villain here is really just kind of weak. But yeah. That was my review of Colossal. If you've seen the film, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. If you have any recommendations, put them down there as well. And movie reviewer next door, out.